In aviation maintenance, predictability matters. But the reality is it rarely works out that way. Between legacy fleets, incomplete records, and edge cases, the variables don't fit neatly into a set formula. Hi, I'm Patrick Krause, host of the Nose to Tail podcast. Today, we're talking with Brent Webb, CEO of Aircraft Inventory. We are discussing the growing gap between an ideal process and what's actually possible in aviation maintenance and supply chain operations. Why managing legacy fleet documentation takes experience and precision, why real-world AOG operations rarely follow a perfect script, and how smarter traceability is the path to rebuilding trust. Let's dive in. So, Brent, you wear a lot of different hats. And fins. And fins. We'll talk about that one a little bit later. I definitely have some questions for you there. But really wanted to talk about what you're doing now. And you work with Aircraft Inventory Management.
Yep.
And you're an ASA board member. Is that correct?
I am.
So maybe talk to us about maybe your position on today's inventory and some of the challenges that we're facing in the aftermarket.
Well, I think one of the things that I was actually just in an ASA board meeting yesterday, and one of the challenges that they've been talking about, or we've been talking about, is supply chain, right? We're out of COVID. We've dealt with, as we mentioned during the board meeting, we've gone through several iterations of disasters in aviation, right? We've seen deregulation that had some changes that we all started the business with. We saw September 11th. We've seen COVID, and now we're coming out of those, but we're hitting areas with supply chain, right? Where it's hard for the airlines, who are our bread and butter, to get the parts they need in the time that they need it. That actually happens to be very good business for aircraft inventory that sits in a surplus in inventory of, millions of stock lines that are sitting in the warehouse in Dallas. So it's centrally located and easily deliverable to anywhere in the world. Aircraft Inventory prides itself on shipping on the same day. I think Jet Midwest is a good customer of ours. So we get those parts out, and they're for legacy aircraft, right? So they become harder to find and less supported by the manufacturers as time goes on.
So maybe talk about that differential for the operators in handling an aging fleet with aircraft components in that supply versus maybe a more modern fleet. A 5-year-old and a 15 and a 25-year-old airplane all have different supply chains. Maybe enlighten our listeners about your thoughts related to those different sort of buckets of...
One of my passion projects, right, is so for inventory, when you and I started, we won't talk about how many decades ago it was, but the 727 was an aircraft that had already seen, when we started, probably 20 years of service, right? And we saw it stay for another 20 years. So it was a 40-year-old aircraft. And now we're seeing aircraft that are being torn down in 12 years. Average lifespan of those aircraft is getting a lot shorter. And that's good. Those newer aircraft are having documentation standards that are setting the standard for aircraft that were built before those documentation standards existed. I like to remind people that Eastern Airlines was the launch customer for the 757. Eastern Airlines went out of business in 1990s, right? So the documentation that is required for the 757 that goes on some of the aviation freighter fleets today that they're holding to the standard of a 787, whereas that documentation standard did not exist in the 90s.
Right.
I mean, I think you'll remember when we started, it was, where did the part came from? I wrote you a piece of paper. I told you it came from Eastern, and that was it. That was all that was required. And as we went on, it now becomes, I need this rivet, but I need it back to birth, and I need to know it came through Boeing or SPS or whoever the rivet manufacturer was.
Yeah. Eventually, they're going to be asking for, hey, what mine did the metal come from that's embedded in this rivet?
I mean, you say that, but we're getting really, really close. I mean, I was at an Airbus sustainability event 2 years ago, and they were talking about how Airbus is using technology and satellites to watch the deforesting in South America so they can decide whether or not the deforesting was a problem for the parts that were being manufactured based on the area that the parts were, the raw material was coming from. So we are close.
Well, I certainly think that from a ability standpoint, it's actually completely possible to track it and track it well, especially with technology changes. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And again, I'm curious of really where's that behavioral difference on the 25-year-old to the 5-year-old airplane? When what are the actual flaws? I shouldn't say flaws.
Operational distinctions?
There you go. Operational distinctions.
Yeah. I think that in most instances, what we see is people who've written themselves into corners, right? They've written their operations manual that say, I must have these documents for this part to come in through receiving. And then we see the pressure of those operational measures not being met. And then the plane goes AOG and things go out the window, right? Yeah. What is it? The old saying, I'm sorry for everything I said while it was AOG, right? So I think, I've had instances in aircraft inventory where we've, we've actually had people reject parts that were in the OEM box from a kit that we dismantled, or we took the kit apart, all brand new parts, but they're like, oh, well, we don't have a non-incident statement for it. A non-incident statement? The part has never been on an aircraft. It can't have an incident, right? So, I mean, those are the kind of things that we see. I always say logic does not belong in aviation because it's not logical.
Well, I would certainly say that we try to build quality systems. The operators do too. They try and build a quality system that encapsulates an awful lot of the circumstances that come with the paperwork and the variety of things that are seen in the marketplace. But no system could perfectly capture everything. I think it'll be what will slow down some of the AI things that'll be coming in the future. Is simply they're going to every quality guy's go, oh, see, I missed that one. 0.001. Right. That failure, that's a safety incident, and we got to solve that. So it'll be very cumbersome, and probably rightfully so. It'll be cumbersome to get that and make that system better and better and better until the system is better than people. Hopefully someday we get there.
I don't think you will ever get to the point where a system can be better than people because you have people in the system.
That's true. Bad input equals bad output.
Right. Well, I mean, I did a class in human factors in 2023, and it was kind of a pivotal point for me. And understanding that in most cases, I'd say 90% of the cases, people don't go to do a bad job, right?
Yeah.
They go to do a good job. But at the same time, people make mistakes. And that's where we learn. That's where the growth and the learning comes from, is the mistakes, not from when we get things perfect all the time, we don't learn anything. So we need those mistakes, and those mistakes, like you said, that 0.001% is where we're going to learn and we're going to fine tune. But there are always going to be people in the system, and therefore we're always going to have instances where there's opportunity for growth.
So if you had a magic wand and you could wave it over legacy paperwork, some process that you could have that would bring it up to a more modern standard, what would that look like?
I don't know what I would do for legacy paperwork. Honestly, I'd wave my wand over the quality people at the receiving side, because I would like to see them be realistic instead of idealistic, right? Understand that when you're dealing with an A300, that is a freighter airline, you're not going to get the same paperwork you're going to get for an A350. It just doesn't exist. Right? You're lucky you're getting the A300 part to maintain the aircraft that's 30 years old.
Yep.
And you may be lucky you're getting the part that somebody out there like yourself or myself held onto those parts for 20 years. Right?
Yeah. The simplicity of how it used to be, right? You were talking about the last millennia when we were still working.
We won't talk about how long ago.
But, I remember going through paperwork, and we just had yellow tags.
Yeah.
They were just yellow tag, and it's just a handwritten tag that said serviceable, and was signed off by a mechanic, and that part was serviceable. And you would sell that to the operator, and they would put it on wing or whatever process they had, and it was acceptable to them. And then we went to 8130s, and I think some of those things improved. I would love to see a simplistic standard, to your point, where those operators could have confidence in that process. And that's what's really missing, right? You talk about the quality guy at the receiving desk, but he's just dealing with a big manual hit that his company custom wrote for whatever their FAA compliance was for whatever issue they had one time.
Right.
And they tried to solve that with all these different rules. And I'd love for them to get back to a simplistic rule, whatever it's going to be, something simple that overrides, because it does when they're AOG. When they're AOG, they call, they go, yep, not worried about that non-instant statement you don't have. You have an 8130? Yep, good, send it to me.
Or you don't. You don't.
Or you don't.
8130s are still not regulatory requirements, right? They're regulatory requirements for the bilateral. So when we're sending parts over to Europe, they're regulatory requirements. What's frustrating for me is when we have U.S. tailed aircraft, where the airlines are like, I need a dual release. Why? You're not putting in the part on a plane that's registered under the EU. So there's a lot of people that don't understand all the facets of the regulations. That's one of those things that, at one point in my life, I decided I'm going to read the FARs for fun. Right? And so I started to understand that, and then being part of ASA for so long, and then now as a designee, an FAA designee, as someone who can sign 8130s, I understand what that responsibility and that role is. And so understanding also at the very bottom of the 8130 that it's the installer responsibility, yes. Right? So the situation is part goes in for repair station does wonderfully, right? Somehow the part gets dropped on the way between the repair and the airline. That part fails on wing, but it had an 8130. Does that mean that the repair was bad? No. It just means something happened in the system that caused a failure, right? There's where we learn.
Yeah. And for all of our listeners out there, what you're really saying is, and I know you said it, but the installer of the part is the person responsible for the serviceability of the component.
Correct.
Now, I can see an operator, for example, an operator had a leasing contract and they're leasing aircraft. That leasing company may drive them to say, hey, no PMA parts, no DER repairs.
Or they may drive them to do dual release.
So I can see some circumstances. And what's interesting is they're almost making a false, the leasing company is the one now falling in the trap of the pay for work. Because some operator said, oh, I can't have any of those in my airplane. And we hear those things again. So it's mixes this complicated web of challenges that obviously us in the aftermarket parts business really have to attack.
Yeah.
Maybe let's shift a little bit to ASA, AFRA, and Block Aero.
Excellent.
And I'm a big fan of the concept of taking, especially my dismantle parts, through the Block Aero style process. But maybe talk about how those three organizations are working right now, what they're trying to solve for in the Chinese marketplace is really what's driving this from, maybe not completely, but I think it's a big motivator for the aftermarket to jump in and start taking a deeper look at things like Block Aero.
I'll just back up a little bit. I met the Block Aero guys probably 2016, actually, no, I take that back. I met Todd in China in probably 2012 during a Department of Commerce trade mission. We were over there, met him there before he was actually doing Block Aero. We reconnected in 2018. He and I were on a panel in Abu Dhabi for a blockchain panel, believe it or not. And when we were talking, he was putting Block Aero in place to do aircraft records from birth going forward. And at the time, I basically was like, we need to go and use it for dismantling. I'd actually left AirSail at the time and was working for Cavu. We were doing our dismantling, and it was the time where I was like, oh, this is perfect, right? Instead of taking the parts off and putting them on an Excel spreadsheet,
yeah,
right? Let's put them on the blockchain. It becomes a rebirth record. And so parts that didn't have a back-to-birth traceability would have an opportunity to have a new birth certificate. Because effectively, we can assume they went on the aircraft and they were good when they went on, they've served, and now as they come off, they should be rebirthed to be used in the recycled marketplace. And so that's where that kind of came up. And then when China came about I guess that was actually before COVID, China started putting that regulation in place. Then AFRA got a hold of that and said, let's tie this together. Obviously, I was serving on the board of AFRA, so That's kind of how that came about. And we think at AFRA that can be a good model. The Chinese model can be a good model that if we can see this thing forward, and we believe we can, that we can use that as a model for EASA and the Brazilian aerospace and Transport Canada and eventually the FAA, because we believe that this, like I said before, 90%, 95% of people are out there doing the best work they can. And this gives us a tool to show that we're trying to do things the right way at the right time. And so once we get the Chinese model going, and who knows, maybe we'll get another regulator on board first. But it is a model that we can say, okay, these parts are going into the ecosystem. How that ties off is that AFRA has 90 members, right? And of those 90 members, there's only so many dismantlers out there. Jet Midwest, Cavu, such and such. The real users of that system, that block arrow system, are going to be the aftermarket distributors and suppliers. So they're going to be the ones who are going to be going and utilizing that database and utilizing the proof that those parts came off the correct way.
Well, I certainly think that I like the idea of it because it gives some integrity to those of us who have a good, robust process. In my career, I've seen manifests that were maybe poorly done. It would be a fair way to say it, and you can't tell. There's 8 slat actuators on an airplane, and because they weren't serialized within the manifest, then which one are you getting, 1 through 8, or is it some other slat?
Right.
Magically they put on the wrong pallet, ends up on the wrong airplane, or didn't have a removal tag. It's just this one. So I think some of the integrity of the system that AFRA brings, if you could put that into place with Block Arrow that then secures that,
right.
I think that would be fantastic for the market. And again, I'm curious about how even that search engine works. What does that Chinese operator do when they want to buy that part and that's approved through this process? What are they doing to ensure? So is that me saying I've got this in this?
So let's say Jet Midwest is selling directly. You would provide a quote with part number, serial number. The Chinese operator would go pull in part number, serial number. They would say green, good, because it was torn down by Jet Midwest. It was done through the AFRA best management practices, and it was authorized onto the Chinese civil authority database, right? They go and then they buy it, and you make money, and they're happy, and their planes are flying.
Magnificent. So they've added a step there, right? So is there a conversation as they start to go through that where I can just put my approval on there? Is there, like you would think there's a stock line, right? There's
right.
a billion numbers you can create. I'd be curious if there's a way to code that or to put the link into there.
Some of that is going to be driven by the Chinese Aviation Authority. And so, you say we added a step, but technically we haven't. Technically, the CAAC is already requiring this of their airlines today.
I didn't know that.
But those airlines have to go to the Chinese database that's all written in Mandarin, and as opposed to the Block Arrow one that will be in English. So
interesting.
So that actually happens today, and that kind of goes back to that work is imagined versus work is done. I am realistic. I know that the Chinese are probably getting used serviceable material into their system. But that's not what the CAAC wants. The CAAC wants parts to be verified that they came down through a proper dismantle process. And I think, based on my history of the world, that the Chinese eventually get what they want.
Yeah.
And honestly, the Chinese Aviation Authority put this to ICAO as a model of what could be. And I think it is a good model. Well, and I think you agree that that this is a way for us to take those parts that maybe have come from legacy aircraft, right, that didn't have the paperwork, and allow them to be reborn as such and have provenance going forward. And maybe it's one use, right? But it's right now, all those parts going onto the Chinese aviation database have to be serialized, right? They can be life limited, non-life limited, but they must be serialized. And China has been very open with us at AFRA with regards to, in the beginning, when we first signed the memorandum of understanding with them in 2023, it was airframe material only, serialized airframe material only. And now it's airframe and engine parts. And that's a big change. That was a shift that was came in 2025.
How does AFRA manage engine dismantle, right? Because an engine dismantler, like we use Bonus Tech to tear down some engines.
Right.
I don't think Bonus Tech has AFRA standards. So how do they manage that piece? How is AFRA?
So if an AFRA accredited distributor is using a third party, they would have to push those AFRA BMP standards down to that third party.
Got it.
Right. And then during the audit by an AFRA auditor, those would be evaluated to see if they meet the standards. Right. So an AFRA accredited member could use a third party for dismantling, but they were going to have to push the best management practices down. I would say it would be much better if we could get Bonus Tech to be an AFRA accredited member.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they'll do that, but I would definitely say this. I've seen their shop and I've seen their work, and it is impeccable.
Yeah.
So I have 0% doubt they're probably already exceeding our AFRA standards. We would need to check the boxes with our quality team to say, hey, make sure that if there's anything in here that you're not accomplishing, and validate that with them through an audit. But certainly the work that they put out is pretty awesome.
I've been to their facility as well. It's very nice.
They knock it out of the park for us. So, and their service is really good on top of just the actual activity.
But as AFRA president, I want everybody as a member.
Of course you do. I've paid some checks to some quality organizations before. Of course you want more members.
Absolutely.
And again, back to Block Arrow and the idea of having this on blockchain, I do think this is a magnificent journey. I'm excited. And if you ever need any support on it, I'm a big advocate. There's some blocking and tackling. We were not AFRA accredited for a long time. We actually had the AFRA standard, and we actually implemented almost all of that AFRA standard. We already had implemented in our internal processes.
Right.
But we had not gone out because there was not a reason for us. Our customers had no problems with the processes that we were using. And so we didn't run into that. And when we started exploring Block Arrow, we were like, hey, we need to get this, so that we started that process and are now part of the 90.
Well, we appreciate that.
So very happy about
that. And in time for our 20th birthday, too.
Has it been 20 years?
AFRA started in 2006.
Wow.
So one of the things that most people don't know, I actually have been on the board of ASA, and we won't talk about how long that's been either, but it's been a while. But in 2006, AFRA was started basically in a board meeting. A gentleman by the name of Bill Carberry from Boeing came and asked ASA if they would help AFRA start. And so that's one of the reasons why AFRA and ASA are tied so closely together. It's because ASA lended support in the very beginning for AFRA to start.
You said something earlier about reliability is designed. It's not accidental. So maybe talk about what that really means to you.
I don't know that you can be 100% reliable. I think if you've heard of the Swiss cheese model, you have those failure points that sometimes all the holes in the Swiss cheese line up, but you do your best to design it so that you have resiliency in your system, right? That you're always finding ways to learn from the mistakes and correct those mistakes going forward, so that doesn't become a hole in the next Swiss cheese level that causes your fatality point, right? I'm going to use this as an opportunity to pivot a little bit, right? In the aviation aftermarket of expendables, my rivets should not cause a catastrophic event. In my world of scuba diving, that little bit of problem when you're in a hostile environment that's not meant to support life, that little problem can turn into a big problem really fast. Like not having air. That's a bad problem.
It is a problem. It is a problem. Now, you talked about scuba, so just a little history for the folks out there, and you can elaborate further because you've got more stories there than I'll ever have. I don't mind snorkeling, but I haven't done scuba, so maybe I'll need a lesson.
Yeah.
But at one point in time, you owned a scuba shop?
I do own a scuba shop.
Still own a scuba shop. Thriving?
Yep.
What drove your passion for scuba? Give us a good story about that.
That's a long story. Well, short story, but long, right? In 6th or 7th grade, I wanted to be a whale trainer for SeaWorld. And being in Orlando here, I mean, it's a good thing, right? And then I learned they don't make any money. So I pivoted. I'm like, oh, well, I'll just run SeaWorld. I'll be a director, right? And then I learned they don't make money probably either. So then I got into, it's like, oh, well, I'll pivot to musical composition. They also don't make money. So at the time, my dad, who started aircraft inventory in 1994, and I was going through high school, I went to college at SMU, Southern Methodist University, and went for computer engineering. And that's where my technology background comes from. And I was doing all his IT stuff at aircraft inventory, like we do as young kids, working for family businesses. And while I was at SMU, I took the opportunity to take scuba diving, and while my parents could still pay for it, which was the best way to take it. And came out the other side, and the instructor there was like, oh, you're really good. You should become an dive master and then instructor. So I did that in 98, 99. By 2000, I was a scuba instructor. So I guess I've been teaching for 26 years, teaching scuba diving, and it became something that was a hobby that I could make some money off of. And then in 2020, actually 2019, we decided we didn't like the scuba store we were working with because I didn't like the customer service that they were giving. And that's a pretty key component in my beliefs, is that customer service is important. So I offered to buy them out, and they said, oh yeah, show me $1 million. And I said, show me your books. Well, they didn't show me their books. And I ended up having a friend show me another scuba store, and the guy wanted $150,000 for it. And I think I gave him $80,000, and I took it. And that was January of 2020. We opened January 2020, and then we closed March of 2020 for COVID. It was fascinating. You had people calling the dive shop going, can you teach us in secret? We promise we won't tell. And you're like, well, no one gets COVID underwater, so we're pretty fine. But, it's been 5 years later. We've won the top shop for our training agency for 4 years. I'll say we do over $1 million in revenue, and we train 1,000 scuba diving certifications every year. And I've got really good people who run it.
That's amazing. I can definitely sense that the quality safety from aviation and the quality safety needed in scuba, definitely a parallel path on that journey.
Well, we try to be. I mean, even going back in history to when I first started doing the diving, aircraft inventory was an ISO 9000 company. And I sat there going, why are we not doing the same thing as scuba with quality, right? So scuba is in the United States, is a very unregulated industry, much like the aviation aftermarket is unregulated. And so I sat there going through years going, why are we not doing the same thing quality-wise in scuba that we're doing in aviation? There's a high bar in aviation for quality, as there should be. And so when we started the store in 2020, that was one of the founding visions, was to have that high quality. And then we brought in a guy who does human factors in scuba diving. He's actually ex-Royal Air Force. So obviously he comes from the aviation side and cockpit resource management. So think scuba diving, but we're putting cockpit resource management in it.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Good use case. Infect the rest of the world with more aviation. I love it.
Right? Yeah.
So do you have a short story of the most amazing place to go scuba diving ever?
So yeah, for 20 years, I probably said, people would ask, where's your favorite place to go scuba diving? And I would always say underwater. Easy answer. But in 2023, I went to this place in Mexico. You fly into Tulum. It's a 2-hour drive south. It's just north of Belize. It's called Mahahual. It's a little fishing village, right? But the nurse sharks there are amazing. They act like puppy dogs. They just want to come up and snuggle. I mean, they're still dangerous, don't get me wrong, but they are cute, cuddly, lovable, and the interaction's amazing, right? And it's amazing to be underwater and have that interaction with an animal that, you're not communicating with. I mean, it's hard enough to communicate with another human underwater, but another animal is pretty cool.
Well, certainly I don't want you to become the next Steve Irwin and have something terrible happen to you underwater. So you got to be safe. All right.
I chase tiger sharks for fun.
That's exactly the problem. All right. So I'll keep my fingers crossed that you're doing all the right things. Well, let's go back to aviation a little bit. Let's talk about the next 5 to 10 years for both the aftermarket and as well as what's coming for quality.
So the next 5 or 10 years in quality, I think you're going to see um, a lot more of AI handling some of that quality stuff. I will say in 2006, we started the electronic documentation product team with ATA, what's now A4A, and the electronic spec, it's chapter 16. And I think it's now been 20 years, and they were just one of the award winners. The electronic document product team was one award winner for the Aviation Laureate Award with Aviation Week. So I was in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago for that. So that is us right now, aircraft inventory being one of the launch people that is pushing XML 8130s to FedEx. So I think that's the shift, right? Instead of sending paperwork or PDF copies, we're sending digitally signed data between operators, right? Between myself and FedEx, between Boeing and FedEx, between Boeing and Southwest. And so that enables more data to come over that allows for more ability for those operators to check that what they're supposed to be getting is what's correct, right? And that's where there's a differentiator between the data systems and people. The systems can provide a lot of data. People can't read as much data as they're going to be getting. Right? They're going to be drinking from a fire hose. That's where the systems and the data will need to be in place to be able to handle that.
Nice. So I ask all of my guests on the podcast what their favorite aircraft is and why. So I'd be curious what your favorite aircraft is. Hopefully it's not one that goes underwater.
Cool story. When I was probably 6, 7, I drew a picture of the SR-72.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I sent it to Lockheed, and I actually got a letter back. So the SR-71 was my favorite plane of all time. I mean, it's pretty easy for people to fall in love with that. It is absolutely beautiful aircraft.
Yeah, there's some great stories on the engineering of that aircraft as because of its high speed and the temperatures, and it leaks on the ground and then seals itself up, and it'd be pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything we haven't covered maybe that you'd want to elaborate on or get maybe more in depth with that you'd like the listeners to hear?
I think one of the things that, we touched on was the stuff with legacy aircraft that's really important. I think the side of that, which is, as I mentioned in before, with Eastern Airlines being the launch customer and Condor in Europe being one of the last 757 passenger carriers, the requirements of the European nations to have documentation that didn't exist when the aircraft were actually built is important to reiterate that, this is a great opportunity to get out there and go, let's get a little bit realistic about what we're asking for, right? One of the other things that I see all the time that's a barrier to sales is aircraft operators asking for paperwork that is not legally allowed to happen. And I'll bring this out, which is an A300 that needs a part that's expendable or something, and they want an FAA 8130. Well, as a designee for the FAA, I can't sign that off. It is not a U.S. production approval holder type design. So therefore, I cannot legally sign that off. So what they're asking me to do is do something that's outside my scope. And instead of that item being purchased or procured, understanding that reality, they find it elsewhere with somebody who is. Well, I don't think that that's somebody doing something nefarious. I think they're doing the best they can, but they don't have all the information about what they need, which is what the actual regulations say.
If you could make a recommendation, say there's a young person here works for a company like one of ours and they want to go start their own business, what would be those foundational pieces of information? You had mentioned that you read the FAR. You just went in and did it out of necessity for your own benefit. What would you recommend where they start?
I mean, I think everybody should start with getting involved with the Aviation Suppliers Association, right? That's a good, fast way of learning the business. They have a lot of webinars. They have a lot of education. It's a lot of meeting with people who, again, are trying to do the right thing in the industry, right? So getting involved in industry groups like that, I'm a big proponent. I've done MARPA conferences. I've done Aviation Suppliers Association. I've done AFRA conferences. I'm not an Aeronautical Repair Station Association member, but I go to that conference because there's a lot of good dissemination of information. And I'm surrounded by most of 85% of the people in that room are my customers. So
Right.
it's a good place to be. So understanding that there is a lot to learn, and I still learn every day because the things don't stay the same. They change, right?
Yep.
That's the one constant. Change is constant.
Well, that's amazing. Well, listen, I appreciate you being here. It's been a great dialogue. I think there's so much to absorb in what it is. And again, your point earlier, which is, how we handle that 5-year-old aircraft and how we handle that 25-year-old aircraft really are different pieces. And with all of the freighter conversions happening on the 737s and on the A320s, 330s, 777s, we've got a lot of legacy aircraft that are going to get extended another 20 years. They're all going to be 40-year airplanes. At least I hope they are, and so do you, right? Because that's where we're investing in those marketplaces for that reason. So it'd be great for us as an industry to be able to close that gap and still keep safe, proper parts to service those people. Because and by the way, as you and I both know, as those aircraft get older, the maintenance on them in general gets more expensive. So if we can mitigate those costs by making sure the flow of parts are not absolutely crushing their budgets, that would be hugely helpful for them. And eventually they're going to run out of 727 parts.
As an expendables person, I would just like to start selling parts where the paperwork weighs less than the part. Right?
We're probably some deforestation that you were talking about, us looking. Some of that might be on the paperwork from the aftermarket. That is for sure. There's an awful lot of pieces of paper with a rivet sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
I do have a question for you on the block arrow. And I had this vision as a challenge within our organization because, like you guys, we have just a massive. I have over 500,000 serialized components right now,
right?
And I probably have another 100,000 on wing. And will it be our responsibility if we scrap parts to put that through the block arrow system that part no longer exists? So if I take a part and go, hey, I'm going to take this part. I needed to pull some piece parts from it to repair this one. So this serial number is going to go to the scrap bin and we're going to go through the scrap process.
I feel like that can be automated, but I also think that you're touching on a very kind of touchy subject with that 12 containers of engine material that went missing in Europe recently that was destined for scrap. That, there needs to be a good repository for, yes, these parts were supposed to end up in the scrap heap.
Yes.
And they're not, right?
I think that really is a great use case solution for block arrow is the integrity is there. This part says it's got a scrap cert from, January 1st, 2027, from an AFRA certified supplier. They've scrapped this serial number.
Right.
And then if that shows up somewhere else, is that, then there really needs to be some, so would look and investigate that piece. Would a serial number possibly get reused? Shouldn't,
but it's possible.
But it's possible. If placard got damaged and so we had to reissue a placard, there could be an error there. So certainly some human factors that you got to cross. But in my mind, I really like that idea. Jet Midwest used to do more liquidation at the end of a life cycle of a consignment. And we've really gotten to the point where we say, the stuff that is still in the marketplace we keep, and then the other items we actually just dispose of,
right,
and scrap them out of the system. And it's tens of thousands of parts a year. But we're only doing all of that internally. So, I'd love to follow that process and really understand it a little bit more with block arrow because it does need to leave the market.
Right.
We got to get it out of the system so that it's seen that, yes, this existed off teardown and nope, it's gone.
Right. And I think, aircraft inventory, even on the expendable side, we're keeping records of everything we scrap, right? I mean, now data is cheap. I upload all my scrap certificates to the cloud and they're there forever. Right? So why aren't we making sure we're pulling that to one spot that everybody can be aware of?
Yeah. So for all of our listeners out there who need scuba lessons like me, where do they go to get their scuba lessons?
They come to Dallas, of course.
Okay, so we go to Dallas. What's the name of the shop?
Scuba Adventures in Plano.
Scuba Adventures in Plano. Is that your website there too?
Scubaplano.com is the website. Yep.
Amazing.
But I mean, I think what's really cool is, everybody likes to go play golf, right?
Yep.
So in 2012, I think we did an Aero Exchange conference back when the Aero Exchange conferences used to go down to Cancun for dive. We did a sponsored dive trip down there. And instead of golf, I took people out on a dive boat. We had 4 hours on a dive boat and they got to see all the stuff underwater. Now, they were certified divers, but I mean, it was a really cool time. And you're still spending 4 hours with people and you communing and everything else.
Well, you don't have to be certified to play golf. I know because I've been to some of those golf events, and
I think I would be decertified if they saw me play golf. Right? I used to live on a golf course, and I'm a solid D player.
Well, we do help because we play a scramble, right? So you let 4 people hit the same shots. You're taking the best of 4, and even then, sometimes it's a bit of a challenge, but certainly always good to have a good networking event.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I appreciate it.
Yep.
It's been amazing, and
Likewise.
I'll have to come down to Dallas and get certified on scuba.
Absolutely.
I do. I've always been a pool rat. I've always been in the water. I've always loved it. You got me honest. It's a little like flying an airplane. I'm like, I think I'd enjoy that, but that takes responsibility. Like
scuba diving is like flying underwater.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Literally, there's only 2 people in the world who feel weightless. It's astronauts and scuba divers.
Brent, appreciate it.
Yep.
It's been amazing. To all of our listeners out there, be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Nose to Tail. Please like and subscribe to our channel. Presented by Jet Midwest.